If you're a fan of the podcast, or basically you've been paying attention to health, fitness, and wellness and nutrition in the last, 10, 20, 30 years, you've no doubt heard about the food guide pyramid. And you've heard about the concerns of heart disease and also obesity. You may or may not have heard of what's called the lipid hypothesis, but these are all terms that we talk about a lot. Well, I talk about a lot of my podcasts, but how do they actually relate? What is the history of all this, and where are we with all these different principles? Well, starting today, we're going to begin a 3-part series delving into the lipid hypothesis, history of where it came from, the food guide pyramid, same thing, how did it come about, and what has been their effect on heart disease and obesity. And I'm not tackling this subject alone. I've got 2 fantastic experts going to be joining us. Dr. Paul Langevin of Star Valley Osteopathy, an osteopathic physician. Our friend Tonja Greene, dietitian, to help us with the nutrition part. And we're going to dive into all 3 of those, starting today with the lipid hypothesis and its effect on obesity and heart disease today on the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast. Good day and welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast. My name is Garrett Williamson. I'm president of Personal Edge Fitness and your host. And I'm so glad today to have with me 2 of my favorite guests on the podcast, dietitian Tonja Greene. Tonja, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
And all the way from Star Valley, Wyoming, where it's bright and early and a beautiful day out there, I have to say. I'm not sure how he feels about it, but it looks beautiful to me. Dr. Paul Langevin of Star Valley Osteopathy. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
This is something, the reason I have these 2 individuals on this particular topic in these 3 podcasts, like I said in the intro, we're going to be doing a series here, is because we're all very passionate about this issue. We've had a lot of people that we've worked with, and we've run in and seen the effects of it. And so we thought it would be a good idea to do this series and clear the air on the lipid hypothesis, the food guide pyramid, and its effect on heart disease and obesity. As always, if you're interested in getting in touch with the show, please reach out to us, area code 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. You can also reach me, Garrett, at personaledgefitness.com. If you have any questions, reach out to us on our website, personaledgefitness.com, Facebook at Personal Edge Fitness, and X at Team PE. If you have any questions about this podcast or any others, or an idea for a podcast, if you happen to watch this on social media, or of course, I'm sure either that or catching on any of the many ways you can get a podcast, please be sure to like and follow so you don't miss an episode, and we'd appreciate your support. We're starting today with the lipid hypothesis, and that I think, and I'm right, I think this is kind of where all this began. Would you say?
Yes, and it's a time where I think we became more interested in health and fitness. But yes, it was this big, giant, loud noise, this big push, and everybody jumped in.
Paul, I know you know a good bit about the history. We've talked about the history of a couple of things: food guide pyramid, the lipid hypothesis, and what have you. Can you take us through that a little bit? And by the way, I'm gonna do a little trivia here with you. Yeah. Well, if there was one event that started all this, what would it be? Now you know your history.
Okay. I don't like the physics idea of the underlying one law that explains everything in the universe, but
no, not law. I'm looking for an event that started all. I'm looking for the event that started all this.
A year ago, I would have said the McGovern report, but the more I've read, I think it's going to be more Ansel Keys and the Eisenhower heart attack.
Bingo. 1953. That's why I feel. That's why my opinion. Go ahead, though. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no. Yeah, that I think, because that was a very public event. You have one of the greatest generals of the 20th century,
right?
Who becomes president. I mean, he could have been a Democrat or Republican. He would have been voted president. Doesn't matter.
Ask
it's Dwight Eisenhower.
Yeah, exactly. So
he has a heart attack, and then the country stops breathing for a second. They become apneic because this hero had a heart attack, And so it was very publicized, and it came out like, well, you know, he eats too much fat.
Right.
To that
Well,
simple thing.
and it scared the country.
Oh yeah.
I mean, here, like you say, this popular guy, he was the Supreme Allied Commander. And in fact, Truman, actually, when he approached him, when Truman was president, literally said to him, if you chose to run for president, I would be your vice president. And it shocked Eisenhower. I mean, that's how popular it was. Ladies had jackets that were the Eisenhower coats that had the epaulets on. He was just so popular. And I think everybody blew their mind that how could this person that played golf all the time, was extremely fit, how could he have a heart attack? And that's why I think that's what you're saying. You said a minute ago about it made the country basically stop breathing for a minute. And what have you.
It has nothing to do with the fact that he ran a whole theater of war.
Right, exactly.
And planned and executed the Normandy invasion.
Exactly.
That wasn't stressful at all.
No,
it was
right,
the fat.
not stressful.
It was the fat.
Exactly. And the fact there was another thing that he did on a regular basis, even though he said he quit during World War II. And I'm you and I know nothing about this. So I'm gonna turn to the dietitian and ask, would smoking have anything to do with possible heart disease?
Maybe.
He was a 2-pack-a-day smoker. So anyway, okay, that the country stops breathing, and we have this because we have this event. So that led to what? And bring Angela Keys into this. What happened?
So he got onto this lipid hypothesis and wanted to prove it. Okay. And he did this multi-country study, and it was groundbreaking. It was the most, thorough review. And it showed that these countries that had low fat, high carb diets were lots of vegetables, less meat. They lived longer, they were happy, healthier, everybody's income improved, all this stuff. Okay.
Exactly. I mean, the taxes were better. The dog came home at night. Yeah.
Yeah. And then that's awesome. The data was phenomenal. And you can make the data look great if you throw out 60% of the data points.
Exactly.
So and people, you get these landmark studies, or so-called landmark studies, and then they kind of feed on themselves. And you saw this historically. Then Harvard started studying this, and then they started doing a lot of cholesterol metabolism in the 50s and 60s. And so they kind of feed on themselves. If you want to be successful, you got to be like Dr. So-and-so, and you got to do this research.
And we're going to actually, excuse me for interrupting. I want to go back up a little bit for our listeners, because I know where you're going with this, and I definitely want to get into that. But I want to turn. He established this in the World Health Organization conference in 1955, and at the time, I think that basically we were looking for, since we were panicking about heart disease because this incredibly popular person had a heart attack, we weren't going to look at that time. If you think about it, this is 1953, 54, 55. We're not going to a German, and we're not looking for an authority in Japan. We're going to look for an American, and that name that we knew was Angel Keys. And Angel Keys was as y'all probably know, was the founder of the K ration, and did a groundbreaking study on starvation. Actually, with some folks that were conscientious objectors in the War II. So he's actually a very popular guy. He'd done a lot of things, but he presented this to the World Health Organization in 55. Given an annual budget of over $200,000 a year to studied it from 55 to 70. But he came up with this thing called, we keep mentioning it, the lipid hypothesis. Tonja, can you describe to us simply what the lipid hypothesis is?
Well, the lipid hypothesis is says that higher intakes of cholesterol and saturated fats will put you at a higher risk for heart disease.
Right. Right. Well, there's two parts of this. One part that's actually true. I was trying to find something before I go bashing this. Before I find something, number one, that high saturated fats diets do tend to increase cholesterol. Would that be true? Just that one statement, is that true?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe you should be asking the doctor this question, but I mean, there's I think it can be, but I don't think it can be a blanket statement of, yes, this happens all the time.
Well, and I agree. And we've got studies about that. Number two of the lipid hypothesis, what you were talking about, and that is increased cholesterol causes heart disease. Now, you know about risk factors for heart disease and what have you. Is high cholesterol a cause of heart disease, Paul?
Like most scientific answers, the answer is it depends.
Okay.
Are we talking natural forming cholesterol in the body that we produce genetically, which you can have some small familial genetic disorders that alter that? Or are we talking about normal to increased dietary cholesterol? And I'm not, I don't think it really contributes much at all, if any, to heart disease at all.
Right.
I think there are other factors that play a much bigger role. So if it does, and we really haven't teased that out, and trust me, they've studied this a lot.
Copious amounts of studies.
Yeah, that they really, nuance is lost. I don't think they understand how cholesterol plays a role into this. I think they've simplified it down so much that I have a hard time believing that just straight up cholesterol is going to cause heart disease, lead to strokes, heart attacks, congestive heart failure, those kind of things.
True. And go ahead. I'm sorry, please.
No, I was just gonna say, if I could just piggyback on what he says, and I think you're going to hear this throughout the series, but one isolated thing I don't think is ever the way to look at something. To take one isolated vitamin and say this is going to do this. It's always the orchestra of everything.
Absolutely. And
that we need to look at. It's never, hey, this is going to do this, whether the final outcome is supposed to be good or bad. There's just always more to the story. It's never one thing.
I love that. And actually, every time you and I've talked about people, you've talked about the fact that okay, I want to look at this one. I'm going to get this microscope out.
This one thing.
And you're like, let's look at the entire diet.
It's an orchestra.
We see that in exercise. I have people come in and say, look, don't do anything else on me. And they'll grab one place of their body. Just get rid of this, do this. And we have to look at all of it. Boy, does that scream to osteopathic medicine in your approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, how you approach that, talking about people coming with an injury or something, and how you look at that from the comprehensive approach.
Yeah. I mean, you have to look at everything. You have to look at how they live, what their activity level is, how they grew up, what did they do? Was their occupation? You have to add this all together to kind of come up with a plan. They come in thinking, I'm going to do some sort of manual stuff or a little acupuncture. My pain's going to go away and I'm going to live my life happily. Okay, well, what's your workout routine? I stretch sometimes. That's okay. That's not a workout routine. What's your activity? Are you sitting all the time? Are you driving all the time? So you have to kind of approach this. What's your diet like?
Sure.
And it's,
and here we were in the lipid hypothesis trying to focus on basically one thing. But a minute ago, I cut you off. You were going down a great road, which I love. And that is, all right, just the 7-country study and the fact that it really wasn't 7 countries. It was 22, and it was convenient to throw out, 15, 14 countries or whatever out of the study. Because like you said, when you get rid of the data points, but all right, so we've got this study that quote unquote proves it. For any scientific process, if you've got a hypothesis and you think you're proving it, what's the real test of a hypothesis? Or what's the real test of whether or not that study was successful? And that is being able to repeat the study. Paul, take it from there. That's where I think you were going.
So, so when you have something very public and very earth-shattering,
right?
Because before this study came out, people weren't too concerned about this. And they knew people were, Eisenhower was old. Okay. Yeah. He was a smoker. He had a very stressful job.
Extremely.
And so when you have this groundbreaking thing that makes public and it's put in people's faces, because there were only 3 networks back then, and the newspapers were really pounding this home to people. And as I said, like Harvard started taking off, Yale started taking off as far as like nutritional studies, and they started making groundbreaking studies in like cholesterol metabolism and what have you. Everybody wants to jump on that bandwagon. Right. And you see this across science.
Okay? Well, there's a reason why they want to jump on the bandwagon.
It's going to funnel the money to them.
Exactly. And I've got a list here talking about this, about different studies. And actually, first I want to talk about the fact that there were so many critics at the advent of it. And I've got one here, Dr. Robert Olson. The reason I bring him up, University of St. Louis, you can actually Google this as a video of when this went to something we're going to talk about later, which is the food guide pyramid and the whole McGovern committee and what have you. He actually pleaded in front of the McGovern committee, quit this, wait till the data comes out. And he was actually talking about another study going on at the time. And he said, wait till the data comes out. If you don't, you could cause a problem with epidemic proportions. And, look what we have now, which obesity, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But just some studies. The Framingham Heart Study, 1948 to present. The ongoing study is one of the most comprehensive cardiovascular studies ever conducted. In a 30-year follow-up, Dr. William Castelli, the study's director, reported that people who ate more saturated fat, cholesterol, and calories actually had lower serum cholesterol levels. The correlation between high cholesterol and heart disease was weaker than initially assumed. I'm going to keep going just for a second here. Minnesota Coronary Experiment, 68 to 73. Controlled trial was conducted in state mental hospitals, compared groups on a traditional American diet and high saturated fat to those eating a vegetable oil-based polyunsaturated fat diet. No reduction in heart disease or overall mortality. The study was suppressed for many years, only being published in full in 2016. It finished in 1973. Didn't publish it until 2016. I'm going to fast forward here. So we got Sydney Diet Heart Study, 66 to 73. We've got the 2 British studies that were very, very, very popular. I'm going to go all the way here. Women's Health Initiative, 93 to 2005, involving over 48,000 women. You two are scientists. Pretty decent population for a study. 48,000 women.
Yeah.
Low-fat diet did not significantly reduce the incidence of heart disease, stroke, or overall mortality. Weight loss was negligible, further undermining the assumption that cutting fat leads to improved cardiovascular health. I think we have somewhat of a pattern here, if I'm right, about the lipid hypothesis. So, and excuse me for going off on a tangent, but just showing the studies and what have you. But what Paul, I want to get back to you in just a second, because I want to go down that road about how this gets funded. But what did this lead to? And it's something we're going to talk about later, I know, Tonja. But what is this? Okay, we got this lipid hypothesis out there. What did this kind of lead to? I mean, how did this have an effect on the American public?
Okay, yeah, and you tell me when to stop, because I may go too far.
That's okay.
Okay, no, this was happening. I graduated and started practicing early 90s, which was like the kind of the pinnacle of all this, and I worked at a gym.
Yeah.
Okay, so I had all these people, but anyway, so the way that it affected the common man that was walking into my office was, of course, people were cutting away meat to make sure that they got all of the fat cut off of their chicken breasts and steak. And of course, steak was a bad word, but people were they couldn't even look at fat. It was, they weren't going to eat it. And so everybody got pushed into the high carb realm of things. Right. And then it even became, people would come into my office and say, I ate a whole box of Snackwell cookies last night, but it's okay because it didn't have any fat.
Yeah.
So it transitioned into this mindset of, if it doesn't have fat, I can eat it. And not only can I eat it, I can eat as much as I want.
Right. Exactly.
So that's what I saw. I mean, I can remember vividly, a client sat in front of me and said, look, I just want you to tell me what food it is that I can eat as much as I want of. And so I'm not sure where that happened, but all of a sudden people wanted to be able to eat as much as they wanted of a food. And they thought that if it didn't have fat, it's okay for me to do that.
Right.
So again, coming on the scene when I did, what I saw, that's the mentality that people were having. Was carbs. And then fat was absolutely the demon himself.
Well, and that that permeated. It started really from the federal government, and we'll get more of that when we get into the food guide pyramid. But Paul, you were talking a minute ago about the different studies, and this actually, I'm gonna pair the two of these conversations together and how it ended up affecting restaurants and what have you. But if I cut you off earlier on that, I want you to go on that a bit more, if you don't mind, but talking about how these studies were funded, why we took this track. With one guy comes up with this hypothesis, and we end up taking this track.
So that's going to bring us into the 70s with the McGovern report. Okay. You ready for that?
We may wait and go into that, because you're right. That's what it led to. It led to the McGovern report and studying food and whatever. And we will attack that with the food guide pyramid. And I'll probably save the information about restaurants. We'll talk about that a little bit in the next podcast. But I tell you, let's jump to the ending on this, just addressing lipid hypothesis and heart disease. I mean, that was our goal at the first, right? I mean, the whole reason this started was we had a person had a heart attack, and we want to know something about heart disease. What did it? And I'm open this to both y'all, but okay. So we have attacked the lipid hypothesis. We've done something about that. What were the effects on heart disease?
So when you come up with a demon, a bad guy in the story, then you put all your efforts towards that bad guy, and that's going to steer research into that. Right. So from a medical perspective, we had to drive down cholesterol in patients. We're going to drive down cholesterol. That's going to save the world, and the rainbows will come out. Yes. And so our biggest night was statins. Yes. And so I remember my medical training was in medical school from 97 to 2001. And I was doing a cardiology rotation. And that's when statins really first came out. Right. And American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology came out. They're like, this is the greatest thing ever. We're going to save people. And I trained in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Okay. Probably the food buffet capital of the world.
Very much so.
And so my cardiology rotation was at St. Francis Hospital for 10 years. Up until I got there, and probably beyond that, it was always one of the top 10 heart hospitals in the country. Wow. Yeah. It was an 18 cardiologist group practice, so it was massive. Right. And I just remember talking to the cardiologists, we're just learning about statins, and they're like, this should be put in the water source. This will save people. They are literally saying this to me. Oh gosh. Amazing. And you look at the data, and it's like, wow, okay, that looks great. But you fast forward 10, 15 years, you're like, oh, that's a keyhole of the data. This is the actual data. Right. What are we doing here? This is not what you're supposed to be doing. True. So it's wrought with a lot of complications. And the thing is we don't, informed consent is supposed to be there, even though a lot of times we brush over it, but we don't tell people, hey, this is going to hurt your muscles. It may hurt your joints. And in rare occasions, it'll kill your kidneys. But take this because it's going to make you live longer, which the data didn't really support that. So that's where you go down when you pick one thing as the bad guy. Right. And you got to be careful with those consequences as opposed to looking at it holistically. And you said you talked about when you started, and it was a hospital-based fitness facility, if I'm correct, if that's right. That when you started, and this was kind of the pinnacle of all this. So obviously, since we were attacking cholesterol, well, you weren't dealing with obesity then, were you?
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean,
sarcasm was my love language.
I know, and I was just talking to somebody the other day, and I feel like like you mentioned earlier, Paul, all these medications are handed out and no one wants to look at weight. Rarely do you hear, hey, you need to go talk to this person and this person. You need to lose 25 pounds. You need to lose 50. You need to lose 80.
Yeah.
And that's not what I hear. What I hear is, well, I just got put on this, this, and this.
Yeah.
And obesity is a very big commonality.
Still 72% of our clients come into the base. And Paul, in your practice, and that's not, I mean, that's what we do is health, fitness, and wellness and here at a personal training facility. So obviously 72% of our clients are going to come to us for general fitness and weight loss. But just in your general practice, how much of it do you see obesity?
It depends on where they come from. If they come from Jackson, not a lot.
Right. Okay.
Because it is the wealthiest county in the world.
Right.
If they come from other parts of Wyoming, I see quite a bit of it. Right. And they wonder why they're in so much pain and they're on this medication. And kind of getting back to what we were talking about, the outsourcing of personal responsibility for health and well-being.
Yes.
There's no study comparing losing 25% of your intra-abdominal fat versus a statin. Wow. They'll never do that study.
I'm certain they won't.
Because the statin will fail miserably.
Right. And there's basically no money in it. I'm going to put a cap on this one because I know we're really chomping the bit to go to the food guide pyramid. I want to get into that, but just some numbers, which are interesting. And for the listeners, please just take this information and do with it as you will. Before the lipid hypothesis, from 60 to 80, before the dietary guidelines for Americans were introduced in 1980, only about 13 to 15% of adults were obese. By 2022, that number had skyrocketed to over 42%. Now, 13 to 15%, all the way, and skyrocketed and jumped to 42%. Well, it's kind of hard for me to draw anything but one conclusion to that. So, guys, I'm gonna draw this to a close for today, but we're going to be picking this up and tell everybody, listen, stay tuned because this is only one part of this. We're going to dive into the food guide pyramid, what this actually led to, and setting up the dietary plan for America, which actually ended up with the world. And then we're also going to do a third podcast where we're going to talk about not only the basically put all of this together, but we're going to also show how we're not even measuring or tracking any of this correct. So I want to thank my guests for being on today, Dr. Paul Langevin of Star Valley Osteopathy. Paul, tell them how to get in touch with you if they're asking, have any questions for you.
Pretty easy. You can go to my website, starvalleyomm.com. I have an email there, patient contact, things like that. Even if you're not a patient, if you want to ask me questions, I have no problems with that.
Great.
But yeah, that's the best way.
And we'll include that also on. You should have that on the link. You should be looking at a link on there if you're watching this on social media or seeing on our YouTube. There'll be a link there. Tonja, thank you so much for joining us as always today, and also stay tuned for the podcast because about once a month, Tonja and I get together and do a podcast on nutrition. So thank you again for joining us for this one too. So, and just to let you know again, if you have any questions about this particular subject, or I'd say if you were offended or this really blew your mind on how could we possibly attack something like this, please reach out, give me a call, 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. You can also reach me at Garrett, Garrett, at personaledgefitness.com. It's our website too, and Personal Edge Fitness, our Facebook page. Hit me up on X at Team PE. Folks, it's good to do the research and find out what is the truth and getting to the facts of all this, which is what we're trying to do here. And one more way we help you reach your level of wellness. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you next time.